Okay, today's daf we're going to be learning is Kuf Kaf Hey. We're going to start at the bottom, a little bit of a shorter daf than yesterday. We're now continuing with a list of, if someone could put up the sheet in the chat from the site, that would be great. There's a sheet for today to organize also. So what we're starting with, and this I put on the sheet, I put a few of the cases from yesterday. We're in a list now of different items. Are they muktzah on Shabbat? And again, the whole issue becomes, do they have a use or do they not have a use? So if they're useful, then we're going to say they're not muktzah. And then one can move them. So we were up to the cover of a barrel. Rabbi Yehuda said in the name of Shmuel. Okay, we're going to start here, 5 lines from the bottom. Amar Rabbi Yehuda Amar Shmuel, Megufat chavit shenichtita, mutar letaltel b'Shabbat. If you have a cover of a barrel that's usually made of earthenware and it breaks into pieces, you can carry this on Shabbat. And the issue is that probably you can use this to cover a kli or something like that. The shards are useful. Tanya Nabi Hachi, there's a brighter to support. Migufa shenichtata nichtatita hi ushvareha mutar letaltela b'Shabbat. It and its pieces, the broken shards of it, are allowed to be carried on Shabbat. V'lo yisfot mimena shever lechasot ba'et hakli u'lismoch ba'karei hamitzah. You can't start fixing it, like let's say sand it down a little bit to make it more worthy to be used as a cover, or to, let's say, put underneath your bed. Let's say the bed isn't even and you want to put something underneath, right? Classic when you go to a restaurant and the table's always a little, and you ask them at the restaurant, please bring something to make sure the table doesn't, move back and forth. So if you want to put it under the bed, you also can't do that. In other words, again, you can use it if it's worthy for that right away. But you can't start fixing it up to make it useful for some other purpose. The ims are kaba ashpan. This is the important part that we're going to deal with right now. Once, if you threw it in the garbage, then asur. Because then already, what do you show? A lot of this has to do with what we've always talked about, what your intent is. So today we're going to talk a lot about intent and how do you have to do actions to show intent? Is it enough just to have intent? Here you do an action that shows your intent. You threw it in the garbage. That shows you clearly aren't planning to use it for anything. But interestingly enough, Rav Papa doesn't like this. It seems pretty logical, but comes Rav Papa and he has a good question. If you throw your jacket into the garbage, is it going to be muktzah now? Just because I threw something in the garbage, does that mean that I don't plan to ever use it again? And even if I don't plan to ever use it again, take my cloak can be used. Even though it's in the garbage, it could still be used. I was thinking about this because I threw away a shirt the other day. It was torn, and I threw it in the garbage. Someone saw that it was in the garbage, and they took it out of the garbage because they thought, oh, well, there shouldn't be a shirt in the garbage, so they took it out. So maybe this also is a good indicator of why there might be a difference between a shirt and a broken piece. Now, it happens. In this case, it was broken, but it wasn't noticeable that it was torn. They didn't know. So anyway, he says, Elam Rav Papa im zarkami ba'od yom la'ashpa asura. Rav Papa says, only if I threw it in the garbage before Shabbat, and then when Shabbat entered, it was in the garbage, that's an indicator that I don't plan to use it anymore. But if it was put in the garbage on Shabbat, since it was worthy when Shabbat came in to be used for something, and now it's in the garbage, that's not sufficient. Now, even though he's not exactly saying this, it still seems like he's making a distinction between the cloak and the shard. Because why is there a difference? The shard, remember we talked about the other day, that it all depends on what the status was when Shabbat comes in. So now, when Shabbat came in, you already threw this shard in the garbage. You basically said, shard is not equal to vessel, because it's a shard and I threw it in the garbage. So that means it's not anything. If my cloak was in the garbage, my cloak is not a broken kli. It's a cloak that I don't really plan to wear anymore, but it's still a cloak. So therefore, even if I threw it in the garbage before Shabbat, it would still be considered a vessel because it still is, it hasn't lost its name just because I threw it in the garbage. But a shard that was in the garbage before Shabbat, when Shabbat started, I already had set it aside. I don't plan to use this. That's not considered a utensil. Next case. Amar Bar Hamduri, Amar Shmuel. It's not a name I remember coming across very often, but someone's name, Bar Hamduri, the son of Hamduri, says in the name of Shmuel. If I have a mat of reeds, and the mat is old, and I end up with pieces of reeds that come out of the mat, I can carry these on Shabbat. You might say, what are these worthy for? My taima, Amar Rava bar Hamduri. So Rava, his son, says, Esber Ali, I will explain. Machatzelet gufa lamai chazia, l'chesiye be'afal. What can you use a machatzelet for? Generally, you use it to cover up dirt. Right? We want to sit on a mat. We put it on the dirt, and it covers the dirt. Haninami chazia l'chasuye be'tinofet. Let's say, remember we talked about there was spit, saliva on the ground a few days ago, and they wanted to rub it into the ground, or they wanted to cover it with a kli. Theoretically, I could take this reed that broke from my machatzelet. I could stick it over a small piece of saliva, and that would protect the right. Then I could sit there, or I could walk on it and not feel like I'm walking on saliva. So just like the mat can cover a bigger area of dirt, this can cover a little bit of dirt, and therefore it's worthy, and therefore I can carry it on Shabbat. Amar Rabbi Zera, and again, as long as we can find some use for it, then it already is okay. Now we're going to say, Amar Rabbi Zera, Amar Rav, Shayarei Pchuzmiot Asur L'Taltalam B'Shabbat. Okay, if I have, Rashi says it's a talit, I have a cloak, and I now have pieces of it, cut up pieces that broke off or ripped, torn pieces, I cannot carry these on Shabbat. So Abaye now explains, Amar Abaye, b'matzlaniyot she'en behem shalosh al shalosh, d'lo chazin lo laniyim v'lo la'ashirim. We're talking about pieces of the talit that are so small they don't even have 3 fingers by 3 fingers. Remember, we've talked about that amount. If something's 3 fingers by 3 fingers wide, then we're going to, or 3 long by 3 wide, we're going to say that then already a poor person wouldn't throw this out because they'd use it, they'd find some use for it. But if it doesn't even have 3 by 3, then it's not worthy, not for aniyim, and of course not for ashirim, not for wealthy people. So when we talk about these small tattered pieces of your talit, what we mean is they're muktzah if they're smaller than 3 by 3 fingers. And again, this was the same shiur that we use for tuma and tahara. That's where we saw this before, that if it's 3 by 3 etzba'ot, then already it can become susceptible to impurity because there's poor people who use this as something. Tano Rabbanan. Shivrei Tanor Yashan. This one's not going to be as simple as all the others. We're going to see a machloket here, and then there's going to be a debate, 2 different opinions, what the machloket is about. We're going to actually reject both opinions, and then we're going to go back and reestablish the first opinion. That's the structure of what we're going to do right now. So the Braita says, Shivrei Tanor Yashan harehen kekol hakelim hanitilim b'chatzer divrei Rabbi Meir. A broken shard of an oven. Okay, we need to do a little history of ovens. The way their ovens worked was the oven was made of an earthenware oven, usually. It sat on the ground. And then you put some tiach around, some tar, or I think that's, what's the word? Can't think of the word, but you would put some kind of tar-like material around to stick it into the ground to make sure, to insulate it basically, that the heat doesn't get out. And then you would light a fire inside the cavity, right, on the ground. So it wasn't something that had a bottom to it. It just had sides and a cover or a top, right? Or it was just shaped maybe that it was entirely covered at the top. What would you do? How would you use it? You would make a fire on the ground at the bottom of the oven. The oven, right, the heat would fill up the oven, and because it was sealed to the ground, you would be able to cement it into the ground. You would be able to basically use it as an oven. It would work very well. But what if, we're going to see now, so let's start with that, and then we're going to see the different opinions here. So if you have a broken part of this tanur, shivrei tanur yashan, an old tanur, he says, this is like anything, you can carry it. Why can you carry it, right? Why does he say lachatzer? Because he means, well, you can't carry it outside because that would be transferring it from one domain to the other. But you can carry it inside, meaning it's not muktzah. So he says it's not muktzah, and therefore you can carry it. Why? Because it's like any broken shard. What's the difference if it came from an oven? Rabbi Yehuda Omer, ein nitalim. You cannot carry this broken piece of oven. So the first explanation is going to be then before we're still in the Braita here. He'id Rabbi Yossi mishum Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov. We're now going to have testimony about what exactly people did. So he says in the name of Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov, Al shivrei tanur yashan shenitalim b'Shabbat. We hold that you can carry these like Rabbi Meir. And another thing he testified about, which has to do with the Mishnah we're going to see on the next page, the next daf tomorrow, Va'al kisuyo she'eno tzarich beit yad. The cover of the oven, okay, I said maybe they had covers, maybe they didn't, but if you have a cover to the oven, the lid, it doesn't need a handle in order to allow you to carry it. You can carry it even if it doesn't have a handle. Okay, we'll talk about what the issue is there, but he was testifying both about this Mishnah and about an upcoming Mishnah. So what's the root of their machloket? Amar Abaye, if you remember the Mishnah we learned yesterday, let's just go back for a minute. The Mishnah on Kuf Chaf Dalet Amud Bet says, Kol hakelim hanitalim b'Shabbat shivreihem nitalim imahem. You can carry a broken piece of kli, a vessel, ubilvad shiosim me'em melacha, as long as they can be used for some purpose. That was Tanakama, which we're going to say, Tanakama generally, often we say, Stam Mishnah Rabbi Meir, that's Rabbi Meir's opinion. Rabbi Yehuda said, though, bilvad shiosim me'em melachtan. They have to be used for the same or very similar purpose that the original kli was used for. And then he said, right, if you have a bowl that held generally thick dough, so then you would have to use it as something that could hold soup, which is also thick. And if it was a glass, then it would have to be able to hold oil, which is something that generally went in a glass jar. So Rabbi Yehuda said it has to be used for something it could have been used for before. So Abaye says very simply, that's exactly the machloket here. This is a kamiflage. Their machloket is about this exact topic. Can you use a kli? What's a shever tanur? A broken shard of an oven. Can't be used in an oven anymore. It can be used to cover a utensil, something like that. So therefore, Rabbi Meir is going to say, right, as the Rabbi Yehuda l'tameh, Rabbi Meir l'tameh, everybody goes according to their opinion. Rabbi Meir says as long as it can be used for something, that's great. And Rabbi Yehuda says it has to be used for the same purpose, and that's why it's muktzah and you can't carry it, because you can't cook with it. Although we're going to see later, maybe you can. We'll get back to this. Matkifla Rava. Rava says, I don't see why you're saying this. Why would this be specifically then a braita that talks about a broken piece of an oven? It should be talking about broken kelim in general. It should be a braita that kind of matches our Mishnah. It's not a specific issue only for ovens. It sounds like it's true for any vessel. If it's true for any vessel, then the machloket shouldn't have been told to us specifically about an oven. So therefore, it doesn't make sense, your explanation. So we have to find some reason why an oven is unique in this way. So Ela Amarava b'shivrei dehai tanur kamiflage. They're having an argument about a specific type of oven, not the type of oven that I described that sits on the ground. Put the fire inside, and and there's some tiach around the side sealing it. Not like that. A different kind of oven. What oven? Well, the oven that appears in a Mishnah in Kalim. Ditznan. Nitano al pi bor o al pi hadut. If you put an oven, instead of putting it on top of the ground, you put it on top of a little ditch. Okay, there's a little indentation in the ground. Depends how, we don't know how deep, but there's some sort of well, ditch, something like that in the ground, and you put your oven on top of that. So now remember, the oven doesn't have a bottom, so you put this hollow piece on top of a ditch. V'natan sham even. Okay, what's the even? Well, in order to seal it into place, right, let's say it's not going to be the exact width of the opening space, so you put a little rock in to kind of wedge it into place. There's pictures if you have the Schottenstein or the Koren, they both have pictures. So if you stick it into the ground like this, Rabbi Yehuda Omer. Now in this case, you don't have anything sealing it in exactly. The Evan kind of puts it into place, but it's not fully sealed. So what's the problem? The problem is that when you try to use this oven, there's two issues. Number one, your fire is going to be already farther away from the food you're cooking because there's depth, as opposed to putting on the ground and then the fire just fills the space. You now have the fire partly under the ground. So it might not heat things up as well. And it's not sealed into place. So all the more so, it's not insulated. It's not going to necessarily work so well. So Rabbi Yehuda Omer, im masik milamata v'hu nisok milamala, if you put that fire in the bottom and it'll work to heat everything up, let's say it's not such a deep ditch and it's actually functional and it kind of fits the space pretty well that there's not a lot of air coming out, then tameh. Then this will be considered a kli and it will be tameh, right? Because again, as long as it can be defined as a vessel that works, then we're going to say it's susceptible to impurity. If it doesn't work as an oven, and we're trying to make this an oven, then it's not an oven, in which case it's not going to be susceptible to impurity. Bim lav, and if not, then tahor, then it'll be pure. The chachamim omrim, ho'il v'husak mikom makom tameh. Since you can light this up in any case, maybe it won't be the best oven. I think about when I first made Aliyah and I ended up in some, not great apartment and the oven barely worked, so you have an oven that barely works. So if you have an oven that barely works, it's still an oven. It still somewhat works. So yes, it's still an oven, and it will be called tameh, right? It will be susceptible to impurity. Ubamai kamiflige. Now, before we get back to this machloket, what's the root of their machloket? The Haikra, they disagree about the following verse. In the Torah, when it talks about a sheretz, a creepy crawler that can transfer tumah, it says, tanor v'kirayim yutatz. If you have an oven or burners, then you smash it. If it becomes, remember, earthenware vessels, if they become tameh, there's nothing you can do about them. The only way to get rid of their tumah is to break them. Then at that point, the broken pieces won't be tameh anymore. But other than that, you can't put it in a mikveh, right? Only certain utensils, but not earthenware vessels. So it says specifically in the Torah about an oven, and that's where they're going to darshan specifically this pasuk. So it should be smashed. Tmeim hem utmeim yu lachem. They are tmeim, and they will be tameh for you. Now, there's a little bit of extra words in this verse. You don't necessarily, once you say tmeim hem, why do you have to say tmeim yihiyu lachem? They will be tameh for you. We already said they're tameh. And also, why did we have to specify the tanor and kirayim, and why did we use the word yutatz? You could have used the word what? Yishaver, will be broken. So Rabbi Yochanan savar, mechusar netitzat tameh, she'en mechusar netitzat tahor. Says only things that are smashable are tmeim, and things that are not smashable are not. Now, what does it mean smashable? Well, there's a few different interpretations here. I'll go with one, which is that the understanding is yutatz is a word that's used for something attached to the ground. Shavar is something used for something that's detached on the ground. The shvor is to break. So why did it use yutatz instead of yishaver? So the reason is because if something's attached to the ground, then we're going to say, if you break it, it's going to be tameh. But this utensil, if it's not functioning properly, then it's not really considered attached to the ground, in which case we're going to say that they should have used the wording shavar. So the fact that it uses yutatz comes to teach you only the type of oven that's actually sealed into the ground, or it's like it's sealed to the ground because it works as if it's sealed to the ground. And that's what Rabbi Yehuda is going to say, only if it actually really works properly. If it doesn't work properly, it's still going to be tahor. The Rabbanan Savre, they're going to darshan in the second part of the verse, the last part. Tmeim yu lachem mikol makom. Tmeim yu lachem is what we call a riboy. It's adding more cases. So what's it saying? Even if it doesn't function properly, it's still going to be tameh to you. The Rabbanan. So now we're going to actually do the ping pong. What does each one say about the other's pasuk? The Rabbanan, ami haktiv yutat. So what does he do with that? Hahu li'idachisa. He uses this for the other direction, which is yutatz is coming to teach you, yes, if it's attached to the ground, but it's coming to teach you the opposite direction, which is if it's attached to the ground, like a real good oven that's attached to the ground solidly, you might have thought maybe it's like a house which is attached to the ground. Now, a house itself does not become impure. Anything the house is considered like the ground itself. Ground itself is not makabel tumah. So you might have thought if this oven is attached to the ground, maybe it's not susceptible to impurity because it's like the ground itself. That's why you have yutatz, to teach you, since when it's attached to the ground, it still becomes tameh. Okay, so he's coming at it from the other direction. You might not have thought it was tameh if it's attached. We're talking about the case where it's not attached, but he's saying that part of the verse is talking about one that is attached, and you might have thought it's not even tameh because it's attached. Kamash malan that it is. V'idach nami, what is the other opinion Rabbi Yehuda do with haktiv tmeim yu lachem? What is that coming to include? If he doesn't think it's including our oven that's on top of the ditch, what would it be including? It comes to include this case of Rabbi Yehuda Amar Shmuel. Rabbi Yehuda said in the name of Shmuel, Ta'amar Rabbi Yehuda Amar Shmuel, machloket behesek rishon, aval behesek sheni, afilu taloi b'tzavar gamal. Here's a bit of an exaggeration, but what is he saying? The whole machloket that we just discussed, by the way, we're now going to understand a little bit differently. It was all only for the first time you use that oven. What happens the first time you use an oven? Well, we don't know this because we use regular ovens, but in those days, if you used an earthenware vessel, generally, how do you make the earthenware vessels? You heat them up, right? Like putting it in a kiln. So here, the first time you use it, it's still a little bit soft. And when you fire up that oven, you're actually churning it. It's not fully a vessel until you fire it up the first time, and that really solidifies the oven and it hardens it. So the whole machloket here, okay, now we're not going to explain it differently than we thought. It's not an oven after you've used it a number of times. It's the first time you use the oven and you fire it up. Then there's a debate, since it's not sealed into the ground and it doesn't work as well, are you going to say that it's susceptible to impurity or not? But once you've already fired it up, then let's say you pick that oven up off the ground and you hang it. This is why it's exaggerated. You hang it on the neck of a camel, okay, which is a bit odd that you would do such a thing, but they're trying to say it clearly can't be used at that point because while you're hanging it, it's still considered a vessel according to everybody because you already fired up the fire in it and it's already ready as a utensil. So therefore, we're going to say that's the case. Tme'im yu lachem is once you've turned it into a vessel, then once a kli, always a kli, basically, until it breaks. But then we're going to say this functions and this will be susceptible to impurity even according to Rabbi Yehuda. Maskefla Rav Ashi. But now let's go back. Okay, that was all a distraction. How did they get to their approaches about this other tanur? But now they want to explain. So going back to the Breita said, broken kelim of an old tanur are like any kelim anitalim b'chatzer. Rabbi Yehuda says, no, they're not. Now, if comes Rav Ashi and he says, if the whole thing was they're talking about this tanur that's sitting on top of a ditch, and that's their machloket, is it a kli, is it not a kli, then what's the obvious problem? Just like we asked with the first one, and we said, why did it say broken oven? It should have said broken any vessel. Here also, Rav Ashi is going to say it doesn't make any sense. If the machloket's all about the oven itself, why are they having a machloket about broken pieces of an oven? It should be about the oven itself. And therefore, he doesn't like this interpretation. So what does he say? Right? Hasha tanur gufa l'Rabbi Yehuda lo havimana shvarav mibaya. If the oven itself is not considered a kli, then why would you even be talking about broken pieces of the kli? It doesn't make any sense. It would be obvious then that he wouldn't think a broken piece would be susceptible to impurity if he doesn't even think the whole kli itself isn't. So Elam Rav Ashi lo olam kedamra mi'ikar. Let's go back to our first original understanding. Again, we said that the issue is, does it need to be me'en melachtan, as Rabbi Yehuda says, and since this doesn't function, a shard of an oven doesn't function as an oven anymore, it's not susceptible to impurity, versus Rabbi Meir, who says, you don't need that. It's enough as long as it's useful for something. So now, and what did we say? Well, then it should have said shever kli. Why did it say specifically oven? So now we're going to have to find something about their machloket that would be specific to this oven. So comes Rav Ashi and he says, Ubaoseh maseh tafka. What's the case? Where the shard of the oven is like, I can't think of the word in Hebrew, but in English, a rafim, like a slat. It's a slab. Okay, there's a big slab of the oven, and you can actually use it. What can you do? You can use it to cook with. How so? You light up a fire underneath, you put the slab on top, and then you cook above it. Now, in the oven, think of a tile. It works like a tile. So in this case, it's actually can be used me'ein melachtan. It can be used like an original oven. So why is there a machloket? So let's see. So he explains, Rabbi Meir lidvarav de Rabbi Yehuda ka'amar. Rabbi Meir obviously thinks that this could be used as a kli, because this is not muktzah, because of course it could be used. He didn't care even if it didn't need to be used in the oven. It could be used, as something. It's muktzah. It's not going to be muktzah. But he's saying that Rabbi Yehuda, according to you need it to be used the same way it was used before. The question is, how much do we find the same? How identical does it need to be to its previous use? So he says to him, Lididi, afilu ba'osim me'em melacha. According to me, Rabbi Meir says, as long as it can be used for anything, I don't care, right? Obviously, it's still not going to be muktzah. But ela lididach, but according to you, o delimia, at least agree with me, admit that in this case, that this is like, since it's a tile and it can be used to cook, put fire underneath and cook above it, it could still be used like it was originally. And why does Rabbi Yehuda think not? Rabbi Yehuda lo dami, these are not the same. Hatam hesekomi b'fnim, hacha hesekomi b'chutz. There, how does it work? So I didn't describe exactly how they cooked, but they would put the fire underneath, or maybe I did already, I don't remember. They put the fire underneath, The walls of the oven is where they cook. They would put the bread. Remember, we learned this before. The bread would stick to the sides of the oven, and that's how they would cook in this oven. So comes Rabbi Yehuda, and he says, this is cooking in a different manner. How similar do they need to be? Incredibly similar. It's not enough, right? With the bowl, okay, so it's functioning like a small bowl. That's what we had before. But here, it's not being used in the oven in the same way. There, the heat was inside the oven. Here, the heat is coming from the outside, right? It's underneath, and the food sits outside the oven. Hatam me'umad hachalav me'umad. There, the food stands on the sides of the oven doors. Here, the food is just sitting on top of where the heat source is. So therefore, it's not enough of the same for Rabbi Yehuda to think that this is still a kli, and he thinks it's not a kli, which means, number one, it can't be susceptible to impurity. Number two, it can't be, you can't move it on Shabbat because it's muktzah. Okay, new section. Now we're just going to be very brief about this. So he holds like Rabbi Meir. Right, this is a good example where somebody comes and testifies about someone's opinion. Because the best way to find out is to hear what people say, or say, oh, I remember that so-and-so said the following. And about another machloket, kisuyo she'eno tzarich beit yad. So Amar Ravina, we're just going to have a small aside about this. Kima mitaltalina idna kisuye de tanura de mati machasa. In mati machasa, all the covers of their ovens don't have handles. According to who do we paskin the fact that we allow people to carry this on Shabbat? Right? De'en lehem beit achizah, they don't have handles on them. Kiman Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov. The fact that in mati machasa this is what they do must be because they hold like Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov. Okay, like I said, we're going to get more into that whole machloket tomorrow. Ha'eren shebekiruya. Okay, here we get creative. People use gourds, like a pumpkin. They would carve out the inside of a pumpkin. They would make it hollow inside. They would use it to get water from the well. Okay, so if you didn't have a pail, so you might cut out your gourd. Now, what's the problem if you do that? The gourd is very light. If it's very light, what's going to happen when you put it in the water? It's going to float and it's not going to sink, and you need it to sink. So what would they do? They would put a rock inside, and then that would weigh it down. What's the problem? A rock is, as we always say, it's muktzah, we call it muktzah machmat gufo. It itself is muktzah. In other words, it itself has no purpose. So since the rock has no purpose in general, and now we put it into this kli, is that going to make the kli what we call a basis ledavar ha'asur? If you put something muktzah and you intend for it to be there, we talked about this with candlesticks. You put your candles on a tray. The tray is now functioning as a basis ledavar ha'asur. It's serving something that's muktzah, and then you can't use it. So if you have this, can you use this basically on Shabbat to draw your water from somewhere? So obviously in a case where you're allowed to draw water and it's not from one domain to another and all those issues that we talked about. So im mimal'im ba ve'ena nofelet, mimal'im ba, you can use it on Shabbat if when you put it in the water, the rock won't fall out. Okay, which really means, as Rashi is going to explain to us here, and the Gemara is going to say this later, shekshura yafeh. It's tied in there in a way that it's going to stay. Somehow they glued it in, they stuck it in. Then what happens basically? It's not a basis ledavar ha'asur because the oven is serving a function in the kli, and it's solidly placed in the kli, which means it's what we call batel to the kli. It's secondary to the kli. It's not that the kli is serving the rock is serving the kli, and therefore the kli you almost don't look at the rock. It's just creating the kli to make the kli functional. Vim lav, but if it might fall out, then ein mimal'im ba. If it's not firmly in there, then you can't, because then it really functions like a basis ledavar ha'asur. It's like any time you put a rock into something or on something, it's going to be forbidden to carry. Another case in the Mishnah, zmora shikshura b'tafiach. If you have a vine that's tied onto a pitcher or a pail, mimal'im ba b'Shabbat. You can also use this on Shabbat. You don't have to worry about the vine being muktzah. We'll talk about this later. Kaka chalon. Now we talk about a different issue. This actually has to do with building. The main thing that's forbidden to build on Shabbat is something like a tent or a covering. So let's say you have these 4 pegs and you want to put a covering over them. You're hot. It's very hot out. You want to make shade. So that's what we call an oel aray. Okay, that's a temporary tent. You can't make a temporary tent, even if it's, okay, it's not permanent. Permanent is obviously forbidden. Even temporary to take out, you have these 4 poles and you stick a cloth over it, that's forbidden. what if the way they had their windows in those days was the window was just a hole? Okay, it wasn't glass in the window like we have. So if you wanted to close the window, you would take a piece of wood or whatever it was, and you would stick it into the wall. Now, what are you doing there? It's basically like building a temporary mechitza. You're building a temporary barrier, like a wall. Now, a wall is different from a tent because a tent covers you and is protective, and that's what, to build, it's all about building houses and things that protect you. The wall is not exactly a protective thing, so it's a little bit less serious, but still, maybe this is building in the wall. You're kind of making a mechitza. So, kaka chalon, Rabbi Eliezer Omer, bizman shu kashur v'taloi pokekim bo. If it's tied, let's say you have a string on your wall, it's tied by the string and it's hanging by a string to just kind of place, like a shutter basically. Place the shutter in the wall the way we have nowadays in Israel anyway, they have trisim, right? They slide in and out, right? Doing something like that to close the shutter, that's not a problem. Even if it's out, but it's kind of hanging there, that's okay. Being lav, but if it's not hanging there and it's sitting on the floor next to it, which by the way, sometimes if you had this board that was sitting on the floor next to your window, you might use it for other things. If it's like that, ain pokekimbo, you're not allowed to put that in the wall because it's, okay, we'll see the machloket at the end of today's daf, what exactly the machloket is about. Chachamim omrim ben kach u ben kach pokekimbo. I don't care that it's on the floor, that it's hanging by a string, by a rope, and either which way, you can put it in the wall. Going back to the first case. So our first case was this rock inside the pumpkin, and if we said if it's solidly in there, it's okay, because then it's kind of considered neutralized to the gourd, versus the rock that's not solidly in there, which could fall out, which is going to create a situation of basis l'davar ha'asur. So now they start off by quoting a Mishnah. Tnan Hatam. It's another Mishnah in Shabbat. Even shal pia chavit. Let's say you put a rock on top of the barrel. Seems like maybe this rock is functioning as a cover to the barrel. How do you get the wine out if you want on Shabbat? You can't move a rock. So mate al tzida v'hinofelet. You tilt the barrel, the rock will fall out, and then you can take stuff out of the barrel. This is what we call tiltul min hatzad, right? You're not actually moving it with your hands. You're causing it to basically fall. Amar Rabba, Amar Rabbi Ami, Amar Rabbi Yochanan. Remember the people here because we're going to keep coming back to them. Rabba says in the name of Rabbi Ami, who says in the name of Rabbi Yochanan, Lo shanu ela b'shocheach. It's only if you forgot the rock on top of the barrel. You didn't put it there purposely, or you put it there, but you didn't mean for it to be there on Shabbat, and you forgot about it. Because what do we say? If you forget, then remember we talked about basis l'davar ha'asur. It's only if you intentionally put it there, like the candelabra on the tray. You obviously put it there because you wanted it to be there on Shabbat. But, so if you forgot it there, then you can do tiltul min hatzad. Aval b'meiniach, but if you placed it there on purpose, nasa basis l'davar ha'asur, then the barrel is a base for something forbidden because it's, right, the rock is on the barrel, which means you can't tilt the barrel because the barrel itself is muktzah. It's not just the rock, it's the barrel itself. That's Rabba's opinion, who says in the name of Rabbi Ami, who says in the name of Rabbi Yochanan. Rabbi Yosef, Amar Rabbi Asi, Amar Rabbi Yochanan. So Rabbi Yosef disagrees with Rabba, and he quotes Rabbi Asi and not Rabbi Ami, who also quoted in the name of Rabbi Yochanan. So we have a debate about where Rabbi Yochanan holds. Lo shanu ela b'shocheach. The beginning's the same. If you forgot it, then you can tilt it. Aval b'meiniach nasa kisoy lahachavit. If you placed it there, then why did you place it there if not for it to function as a cover? If it's functioning as a cover, then it's no longer a rock. The rock becomes a cover. If the rock is a cover, then it functions as a cover of a barrel. So this gets us into the whole big important topic of what do you do if you use rocks as a paperweight, or you use rocks for whatever purpose you want to play chameshet avanim, right? That game kids play. If you have rocks set aside for that purpose, then it's different. And now the question is going to be, how does one set it aside? So according to this, the fact that you placed it there as a cover means you want it to be a cover, which means forget about tilting the barrel. You don't even need to tilt the barrel to get it off. You can pick it up by yourself with your own two hands. There's no problem. It's not muktzah. Okay? So we have two opposite approaches here. If it's placed there on purpose, they both agree if you forgot it there, that's nothing. Okay, and in other words, if you forgot it there, then, sorry, not this, nothing, then it's classic muktzah, and you can tilt the barrel and it will fall off. You can do tiltul minatzat. But if you placed it there, there's a machloket. Does it make the barrel a basis and you can't do anything? Or does it make the rock a cover, in which case you can remove it without a problem? So Amar Rava. So Rava now says each one, interestingly, is going to bring a question from our Mishnah on their own opinion. Usually they bring questions on the other person's opinion. This time they're going to question themselves. Motvina nashmatim. I'm going to question the way I understood it from the Mishnah. Ha'even shebekiruya imemalim ba ve'ena nofelet memalim ba. What does it say here? If the rock is not going to fall out, you can use it, which means it's not a basis, right? And here, why is the rock in this case considered a basis, and the rock in the gourd case is not considered a basis? Now, we already know the answer because we already discussed this when we read the Mishnah. That's why I said Rashi explains based on later on. Belohi, this is not a question because hatam kevanda hadka shavya dofen. Since you rooted it solidly into the gourd, it became part of the gourd. And that's why, in that case, it's not created a basis. But in this case, you just put it on top of the barrel. That's not going to be considered that it's secondary to the barrel. Amar Rav Yosef, umotvina nashmatim. Rav Yosef says, I'm going to now question my opinion from the Mishnah. Because again, what did he say? It's not a basis, it's functioning as a cover. So he says, but what does it say in the second part of the Mishnah? Im lav, ein mimal'im ba. If it's not solidly in there, you can't carry it because it's a basis. So here also the rock is not solidly in the barrel. So why do we say that? Right? So now they say, well, maybe it is solidly. So below, hatam kevan de lo hadka bitule batva. Since it wasn't put in a very, very good way into the gourd, therefore it's considered that it's like a rock inside a gourd, which creates a basis, l'davar hasur. But here, since it's functioning as a cover, and since it's functioning as a cover, we're going to say it's a cover and it's not a basis. So each one kind of brought a question and then answered. But what's really at the root of their machloket? Mar savar be'ina masa, and this is a very, very, very basic issue in Masechet Shabbat when we talk about muktzah and things like rocks and other things that are muktzah machmak ufo. How can we actually end up using them? Now, again, I'm just going to review. These are very different from a utensil. A utensil has a function. So it's very easy to say, on Shabbat, you can decide, well, I'm not going to use it for its regular function. I'm going to use it for something else. But something that has no function at all, like a rock, in order to say it has a function and it serves a purpose, you have to actually do something. The question is, how far do you need to go before Shabbat to do that? So, mar savar be'ina ma'aseh, umar savar lo be'ina ma'aseh. One opinion holds you need a ma'aseh, you need an action. That's Rabbah. And therefore he says, by putting this on top, that's not enough of an action to say, I want this to be my cover. And Rav Yosef says, you don't really need such an action. It's enough that it's there that you could say, maybe you wanted it as your cover. Va'azdu l'tamayu, when they go according to their own approach. Now this is going to be, it's not really Rabbah and Rav Yosef anymore, it's who they quoted it in the name of. Rabbi Ami, Rabbah quoted Rabbi Ami, and Rav Yosef quoted Rabbi Asi. So ki ata Rav Dimi amar Rabbi Chanina, va'amar la'amar Rabbi Zera amar Rabbi Chanina. It was either Rav Dimi or Rabbi Zera who said in the name of Rabbi Chanina. Pam achat halach Rebbe lemakom achad. They told a story about Rebbe. This is again classic. Something happens, somebody does something, and then we try to say, well, what exactly were the details of the story? What can we learn from here? And obviously, many times we get a little confused because somebody has one version and somebody has a different version of what he said, and it's not so clear. So Rebbe once went somewhere, umasani bach shalavanim. He saw a row of stones. V'amar letalmidav, tzeu v'chishvu, kadesh neshev alehem lemachar, v'lo etzrichan Rebbe lemaseh. According to Rabbi Chanina, all he did was he says to his students, before Shabbat, think about the fact that you want to use these tomorrow, and then tomorrow you can go sit on them, you can move them, you can do whatever you want. He doesn't need a maaseh at all, according to Rabbi Chanina. All you need is intent in your mind. Okay, this is, or maybe here it's actually, right, tzuva chishvu, do they have to say it? Again, it's always the debate, do you have to say it or is it enough to think it? But either which way, thought is sufficient. Okay, so there we go with, that's the first opinion. Nobody of our people agrees with that opinion because they all think it needs some sort of maaseh. The Rabbi Yochanan, remember, they both said it in the name of Rabbi Yochanan. So now Rabbi Yochanan disagrees. V'amal hitzrichan Rebbe maaseh. He did need a maaseh. He didn't say to them, and now we have a debate about what happened in the story. He didn't say, think about those rocks. No. My Amar. So what did he say to them? So now within Rabbi Yochanan is machloket Rabbi Ami, Rabbi Asi, which is going to match exactly their machloket in the other case. And that's why this is going to be the basis. Rabbi Ami Amar, Suvilim Dum. Go set them up now before Shabbat as a bench so that you can sit on them tomorrow because you can't move them. Because there's nothing you can do. What do you need in order to move rocks on Shabbat? You need to do a serious act, something that changes their form or something. And there's nothing you can do with these rocks. And therefore, set them up, have them ready, and then you can sit on them because sitting on them is not a problem. You can sit on something muktzah. You just can't move something muktzah. This is also a classic mistake. People always say, oh, don't touch, it's muktzah. No such thing. It's only moving that's a problem. So he says, get them all set up because you can't move these, no matter what. Amar, and that matches Rabbi Ami in the beginning, who said this becomes a basis l'davar ha'asur. You can't move that rock at all. Rabbi Asi Amar, tzu'u v'shifshafum. Wipe them off. If you clean off those rocks, then you're indicating, you're doing an act. You're not just saying or thinking, but you're doing a physical act that shows that you want to use these tomorrow. So by cleaning them off, that's enough. Amar, and that matches what he says here. If you put it on your barrel, then that's enough to say, I'm using it as a cover for a barrel, and you can move it. Amar, shifshafum amarlu, right? That's what he said to them. So there's a debate about what he said to them, 3 different opinions, and therefore we get to different conclusions. Itmar, now it was said about this, the Rabbi Yossi ben Shaul Omer, so arshal kol hatava. Not only do we have a lack of clarity about what he said to them, it was a lack of clarity about what it was. We thought it was rocks. Now we're finding out maybe it was a stack of beams. Rabbi Yochanan ben Shaul Omer, geshosh shel sfina. It was the stick that they would use. We talked about this before when they were in a boat. They would use a stick to ensure that they weren't in shallow waters. So they would kind of prod, right, use a prodder on the floor to see if they were close to the ground. So now the debate is what this was. What's the difference? Well, Manda Amar Geshosh Kol Shaken Soal. If you say it was that implement, now what's the unique about that implement? That's a specialized tool. If it's a specialized tool, then we're going to say it's what we call Machmach Hesron Kis. It's more muktzah. So if you say it was that, and yet it was still allowed, according to, depending on what it was, right, whichever opinion, but it was somehow allowed to be used, then you would say Kol Shaken Soal. Then all of the more so the beams, which are more likely, you can use them. They're not muktzah machmach chesron kis. But you might say this wouldn't work if it was the geshosh, if it was something that was muktzah machmach chesron kis. You wouldn't think that would be okay to just, let's say, think about it or do something with it. Okay, that would be problematic. Okay, now we're moving on to the case of the zmora. Zmora shik shura. So it sounds like shura in lo kshura lo. Sounds like it has to be tied to the pail from before Shabbat. Otherwise, you can't use it. Lema manitin to loka Rashbag. If we say that, then you would say that our Mishnah doesn't hold like the opinion of Rashbag. Why? Ditanya charayot shel dekel shegidran leetzim b'nimlach alehem liyeshiva. If you had palm branches that you meant to use for kindling, now that's forbidden on Shabbat, so it would be melachto le'isul. But you changed your mind about them and decided to sit on them. Remember we said wood is not a kli. It's not a kli. It's muktzah machmak ufo, right? It has no purpose right now for you. And now you change your mind and you want to sit on them. So tzarich likshor. You have to tie them in a bundle in a way that would indicate that you plan to use them for sitting on and not for kindling. Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel omer ein tzarich likshor. You don't need to do anything to indicate. You can use them because they can be used likewise for sitting on. So it sounds like you don't need to do anything from before. And here, this Zmora says only if it's tied before, which sounds like if it wasn't tied before, generally a shoot from a vine is not usually worthy for anything you can use on Shabbat, and therefore it wouldn't work. And that seems to go against Rashbag, who says you don't need to. If it can be used, you can use it. Amar Rav Sheshet, afilu tema Rashbag. Rav Sheshet says, no, I can explain it according to Rashbag. How so? Hacha b'mayaskina b'mechuberet be'aviha. It's when it's still attached to the ground. And then we can say that's why it can be used, because it's still attached to the ground. So the Gemara says, what are you talking about? If that's the case, then it's attached to the ground. You can't use something attached to the ground. You might come to cut it. So what do they answer? A strange answer. If something is growing so low to the ground, there's no problem of using it on Shabbat. We're not worried you're going to cut it. We're only worried you're going to cut something that's high off the ground. Rav Ashi Amar, he gives a different answer. Afilu tema betlusha gzeras shema yiktom. Even if you say if something's detached from the ground, still it might be an issue. It still would need tying. Why would you need tying? Because imagine you have this vine. It's usually pretty long. If it's long, you might cut it to size. So only if it was already tied and it was fit for use for this deli are you allowed to use it. But if it wasn't tied, then we're worried that you might cut it to size, and that's forbidden to do, and that's why we don't allow it. So we only allow it if it's tied, and then it has nothing to do with this machloket. From Shimon Gamliel, it's a different reason why we're forbidding it. Okay, we'll start with this kak chalon, and we'll finish with that. Amar Rabba Bar Bar Chana, Amar Rabbi Yochanan. Hakol modim she'ein osim oel arai b'tchila b'yom tov ve'ein sarich lamar b'shabbat. Both opinions agree with what I said before. You can't take these 4 poles and stick a sheet on top to create shade for yourself on Shabbat. That's an oel arai. You can't make one like that on Shabbat. But lo nechleku ela lahosif. What's their machloket? Can you add? Okay, this is classic. You have a stroller. The stroller has a shade on it. Are you allowed to open it on Shabbat? So this is what we call you're being mosif, because generally strollers, even when it's closed, it's still open. It's still working as a cover of enough of a tefach. It already has a covering of a tefach. Are you allowed to extend it? So that's their machloket. You can't add to a tent on Yom Tov and obviously also not on Shabbat. You can add to an oel arai on Shabbat and even on Yom Tov and also Shabbat. And basically, what does he say? If you can add to an already existing oel, well, let's take our mechitza. We have a wall and we have a hole in the wall and we want to add to it. So there's no problem to add to it. Okay? He thinks to put a piece that's sitting on the ground and it's taken and put it into the wall, that's totally fine. Because if you can do it for an oel, all the more so you can do it for the wall. Because again, the mechitza is less of a problem than a wall. So therefore, he says it's okay, but Rabbi Eliezer doesn't allow adding on to an oel that's already built, and therefore he also doesn't allow adding on to this wall. Okay, so therefore you can only do it if it's already attached and you're just kind of placing it in place. But if it's not attached, then you can't take it from somewhere else and bring it in, and we'll see more about this tomorrow. Okay, if you're fasting, have a good fast, and have a good day.